Florida's Everglades are under siege. As many as 300,000 invasive Burmese pythons have devastated native wildlife, wiping out up to 99% of local raccoons and reshaping entire ecosystems. Desperate for solutions, scientists launched an experiment straight out of science fiction, building robotic prey designed to lure these elusive predators. At first, the robots seemed to offer hope, but when the python's astonishing capacity to learn was revealed, everything changed. How close did this radical idea come to turning the tide? And why did it ultimately expose deeper challenges than anyone expected? Night after night, teams of biologists drove the same remote roads that cut through the heart of the Everglades, their headlights sweeping across sawgrass and cypress. What they found, or more often what they did not, told a story of loss on a scale few imagined possible. In the late 1990s, a typical survey would turn up dozens of raccoons, opossums, and rabbits along these stretches. But after the arrival of Burmese pythons, the numbers collapsed. By the early 20-teens, raccoon sightings had dropped by more than 99% in the core python zone. Opossums and bobcats followed the same pattern, their populations nearly erased from the landscape. Marsh rabbits, once common in the wet prairies, vanished so completely that researchers considered them functionally extinct in large parts of the park. These declines were not isolated blips. Side by side, comparisons of road survey data from before and after the python boom reveal a stark before and after. The Everglades went silent. The absence of small mammals rippled outward, affecting everything from wading birds to alligators as food webs unraveled. In some areas, phoccas and deer became rare sights. Even scavengers struggled, with fewer carcasses left behind for them to find. For scientists, the numbers were hard to accept. Raccoons, once so abundant that they were considered nuisances, had become ghosts. Opossums, bobcats, and rabbits were reduced to occasional blurs on a camera trap. The Everglades, shaped over millennia by the rise and fall of water, now faced a new force. An apex predator with no natural enemies and an appetite for nearly anything that moved. This ecological collapse set off alarms far beyond Florida. If a single invasive species could so thoroughly erase native wildlife in one of the world's most protected wetlands, what hope was there for recovery? The scale of loss demanded more than traditional control efforts. It called for new ideas, new tools, and a willingness to rethink how humans manage invasive species in a world where old boundaries no longer hold. Professional hunters and weekend competitors alike have combed the Everglades with flashlights, hooks, and dogged determination. Yet, for all their effort, the numbers tell a sobering story. Burmese pythons are masters of stealth, camouflaged in sawgrass, silent, and mostly nocturnal. Even in areas thick with snakes, field surveys show that only about 1% are ever detected. That leaves the overwhelming majority hidden, breeding, and hunting unchecked. The annual Florida Python Challenge draws hundreds of participants from across the country. In the latest event, over 850 hunters spent 10 days scouring the wetlands. Their reward? Just under 200 pythons captured and removed. On paper, that is a victory. In context, it is barely a scratch. Estimates suggest that, for every snake caught, dozens or even hundreds remain undetected. Contractor programs run year-round, offering bounties and hourly pay. Over 23,000 pythons have been removed from Florida since 2000. But when compared to population estimates that run into the tens or even hundreds of thousands, the impact is limited. The math is relentless. A single female python can lay 50 to 100 eggs per clutch. Even the most successful hunts struggle to keep pace with this reproductive engine. The problem is not a lack of effort or expertise. It is the biology of the python itself. These snakes can go months without moving, lying in wait for prey to wander close. Their coloration blends perfectly with mud and grass. Even trained eyes can overlook a 12-foot predator lying just feet away. Nighttime, when pythons are most active, adds another layer of difficulty. Traditional hunting, no matter how organized or incentivized, has proven unable to outsmart or outnumber the invaders. The limitations are clear: vast territory, expert camouflage, and sheer numbers. Frustration is mounting among scientists and managers. Something beyond boots on the ground is needed: a new tool, a new approach, or perhaps a leap in technology that can finally tip the ODDS. Burmese pythons hunt with senses finely tuned to the rhythms of the Everglades. Unlike native snakes, these invaders rely on a set of heat-sensing pits, small specialized organs lining their upper and lower jaws. Each pit functions like a thermal camera, detecting even the faintest trace of warmth from a mammal moving through the grass. The difference between the cool night air and the surface temperature of a rabbit or raccoon, just a few degrees, triggers a cascade of neural signals. For a python, this is the spark that sets an ambush in motion. Research has shown that the pit organs of a Burmese python can register temperature differences as subtle as 0.003 degrees Celsius. This sensitivity allows them to strike with precision, even in total darkness. When a warm-blooded animal passes by, the snake's brain overlays the heat signature onto its visual field, forming a ghostly outline of prey. The python waits motionless, its body pressed flat against the ground, muscles coiled for a single explosive strike. Only when the thermal image and the flicker of movement align does the snake launch forward, jaws open wide. The biomechanics of this strike are a product of both patience and power. Pythons can remain in ambush for days or even weeks, conserving energy until the perfect opportunity arises. The actual attack unfolds in less than a tenth of a second, with the snake's head accelerating toward the target at remarkable speed. Once contact is made, backward curving teeth lock onto fur or flesh, and the body coils around the prey. The snake's metabolism is tuned to this rhythm of feast and famine, capable of digesting meals far larger than its own head. For engineers hoping to lure pythons with robotic prey, these physiological details matter. Mimicking the heat signature of a marsh rabbit or rat is not just about matching temperature. It is about replicating the subtle gradients and movement patterns that trigger a python's predatory instincts. Any mechanical system must fool both the thermal sensors and the snake's visual and tactile senses. The design constraints are set by biology. The robot must be warm, alive with motion, and indistinguishable from real prey in the eyes and pits of the hunter. On a workbench crowded with circuit boards, wires, and stacks of synthetic fur, the first prototype took shape. The goal was deceptively simple: build a machine that could fool a python's senses. Every decision, from the choice of materials to the smallest movement routine, had to answer to the realities of the swamp and the biology of the hunter. Engineers settled on a rugged polymer shell, tough enough to survive water, mud, and the occasional alligator bite. Over this, they layered thermal pads, thin flexible heaters calibrated to reach the skin temperature of a marsh rabbit, just a few degrees above the cool Everglades air. The heat signature had to be even and convincing, invisible to humans but glowing like prey in the infrared world of a python. Movement posed another challenge. Early tests with simple back-and-forth motions were ignored by test snakes. Real rabbits don't move predictably, they twitch, freeze, and then dart without warning. To mimic this, the team wrote code that randomized the robot's movements. Short bursts, sudden stillness, a quick pivot, each pattern designed to trigger the python's predatory response. A motorized core delivered these actions, while the outer layer of synthetic fur helped to diffuse heat and add realism. Each prototype cost about $4,000 to build. That figure included waterproofing, remote control receivers, and a suite of sensors to monitor both the robot and its environment. Engineers had to solve for battery life too, relying on solar panels to stretch operating hours in the field. The robots were designed to send alerts when a large animal approached, using pressure sensors and onboard cameras to document encounters. Testing in the lab revealed new hurdles. Moisture seeped into joints, shorting out connections. The heat pads sometimes overheated, creating hot spots that pythons ignored. Repairs and retrofits became a daily routine, with engineers swapping out motors, resealing seams, and adjusting the software that governed movement. Each failure forced a redesign, but each revision brought the robot closer to a deployable field tool, one that could survive the Everglades and stand a chance at luring a python out of hiding. At dusk, the first robotic rabbits were deployed along the edge of a cypress dome. their synthetic fur warmed to just above the night air. Technicians activated the thermal pads and retreated, monitoring from a distance as the Everglades settled into its nocturnal rhythm. Within hours, thermal cameras captured the moment every engineer and biologist had hoped for. A large Burmese python, tongue flicking, glided out of the sawgrass and paused, head angled toward the decoy. The snake's body tensed, and in a flash, it struck, mouth clamping onto the robot, coils tightening around the unyielding shell. In the first week, multiple strikes were recorded at several sites. Each event was logged with time-stamped footage, showing pythons responding as if the robots were living prey. The movement patterns, sudden dashes, freezing, quick pivots, seemed to trigger the snake's predatory instincts. In some trials, the robots were attacked within minutes of deployment. Across the initial trial window, the strike rate was higher than researchers had dared to predict, with more than a dozen direct encounters captured on thermal video. Technology and hope ran high in the field lab. The data suggested the lure concept was working. Pythons were fooled by the combination of heat, scent, and motion. For a brief moment, it looked as if technology might finally offer a way to tip the balance in Florida's favor. But as the team reviewed footage late into the night, questions lingered about how long this advantage would last, and whether the snakes would adapt as quickly as they had to every other challenge thrown their way. Across the first days in the field, every sign pointed to success. Strike after strike was logged, with thermal cameras capturing pythons lunging at the decoys as if they were real rabbits. But as the weeks unfolded, something unexpected began to surface in the data. The strike frequency, so promising at first, started to slip. Where a fresh robot might draw 3 or 4 attacks in a night, repeated deployments at the same sites saw that number fall sharply. By the end of the second trial period, some robots were being ignored entirely, even as pythons passed within striking distance. Researchers pored over the footage and field logs, searching for patterns. The drop-off wasn't random. Individual snakes that had struck a decoy once or twice now showed little interest in subsequent encounters. Some approached, flicked their tongues, and then slid away. Others coiled nearby but never launched an attack. The robots, once a convincing lure, seemed to be losing their edge. Behavioral data from more than 40 encounters revealed the trend in stark terms. Strike rates fell by over 60% after just 3 exposures at a given location. The pattern held across different sites, different snakes, and even after engineers tweaked the robots' movement routines. The initial advantage of novelty faded quickly. Python behavior, so often underestimated, was proving more adaptable than expected. The field team's mood shifted from excitement to disbelief. The very intelligence that made pythons such formidable invaders now threatened to undermine the experiment. If the snakes could learn to distinguish real prey from robotic imposters after only a handful of failed strikes, then the promise of technology as a game changer for python control looked less certain. The data forced a hard question. Was this a temporary setback or a fundamental flaw in the approach? Rain, mud, and the relentless humidity of the Everglades put every piece of technology to the test. Within days of deployment, the first hardware failures appeared in the field logs. Water seeped past seals and shorted out delicate circuitry. In some cases, thermal pads overheated or failed entirely, leaving cold spots that pythons ignored. The synthetic fur meant to diffuse heat and mimic real prey became matted with algae and muck, trapping moisture against the electronics. Even the rugged polymer shells cracked under the pressure of python strikes and the jaws of curious alligators. Costs mounted with every retrofit. What began as a controlled experiment quickly turned into a cycle of patchwork fixes and rushed redesigns. Field teams kept detailed logs, shorted boards, water ingress, cracked housings, and battery drain. Every malfunction sent the repair crew scrambling, disassembling units late into the night, swapping out fried boards, resealing housings, and applying layer after layer of waterproofing compound. For every hour of robot operation, another hour was spent in repair. As maintenance demands spiked, the limits of this technological approach became impossible to ignore. Robotic rabbits triggered alerts with every python approach, and each event was logged in detail. In the first month, these machines enabled a handful of captures, proof of concept, but not enough to dent the population. Most alerts still required people on the ground. Technicians watched live feeds and then sent hunters to intercept, often arriving after the python had already vanished. While each removal mattered, the overall numbers remained small. Other tools filled crucial gaps. Detection dogs trained to follow scent trails excelled in thick brush where robots and people faltered, sometimes leading handlers straight to snakes missed by other methods. The Judas Snake program, using radio-tagged pythons to find breeding clusters, delivered the highest return per effort during nesting season. Drones scanned marshes quickly with thermal cameras, but struggled to distinguish snakes from sun-warmed debris. Every method came with costs. Robotic rabbits required expensive upkeep, and dog teams and drones needed skilled operators. No single approach dominated. The most effective results came from combining tactics, adapting to conditions, and learning from both successes and setbacks. Every phase of the robotic rabbit experiment unfolded under a careful set of ethical checks. Before any field deployment, the project secured permits from the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, with protocols reviewed by an independent institutional animal care and use committee. Field veterinarians examined pythons that struck the robots, inspecting for wounds or signs of distress. In the documented sample, no lasting injuries were found. Strikes left only superficial marks on the snake's scales. All monitored animals resumed normal behavior within hours. Permit documentation and welfare logs were kept on hand for inspection, and project leads made them available to outside reviewers. Camera traps recorded not just pythons, but raccoons, wading birds, and even alligators interacting with the decoys. When non-target species showed repeated interest, the team adjusted deployment sites to minimize disturbance. By making oversight procedures and animal welfare outcomes visible, the project aimed to reassure both regulators and the public that innovation would not come at the expense of ethical responsibility. Transparency became a central part of the experiment's legacy, shaping how future wildlife technology projects are evaluated. Today, every new tool faces the same test: the python's relentless adaptability. Robotic prey revealed the limits of technology against nature's ingenuity. As invasive species outpace our innovations, Florida's crisis underscores a hard truth. Prevention, not just invention, is essential. In the war for the Everglades, long-term vigilance and responsibility matter more than any mechanical breakthrough. What would you try next? Let's talk in the comments.